Welcome to the town of Southampton, Long Island, New York. This documentary has been compiled in celebration of the town's 375th anniversary in 2015. In this documentary, you will see glances of the town's 21 unique areas, villages, neighborhoods, scenic vistas, and cultural and historic sites. We hope you'll learn a little something on the way and meet some of its longtime residents. The documentary was produced by the town's Landmarks and Historic Districts Board, and therefore may have a special focus on surviving historic structures.
When the English colonists arrived in Southampton in 1640, they landed near Conscience Point at North Sea. They left Lynn, Massachusetts, seeking religious tolerance and their own land for farming. They were greeted by the Shinnecock, who guided them southward through a path in the woods, which is now known as North Sea Road, to an area we refer to now as Old Town. The Shinnecock helped the new settlers plant corn and farm in order to survive the coming winter. Chief Noindawa would not have to share his encampments with its coves and bays stocked with fish and mollusks and woods abundant for hunting. Today we continue to protect the pristine land the Shinnecock and the first settlers valued 375 years ago. Through community efforts, hundreds of acres are preserved and protected for future generations to enjoy. Hi, I'm Shella Comparetto. Today we're at the second North Sea Schoolhouse. The first was built in 1767 and was at the corner of North Sea and Noyac Road. It was later moved to become part of a private residence in the area. This building, built in 1909, is in the process of becoming a Southampton town landmark. The residents are so pleased. The schoolhouse now houses the North Sea Community Association and is the site of many events throughout the year.
Good morning, I'm John Griffin. I live at 1679 North Sea Road, which is just around the corner of the North Sea Burial Ground. And we have some information that may be of interest to you concerning the before and after shots of the stones as they were discovered by the University of Pennsylvania students from the archaeological department in 2005 and 2006. In conjunction with the town of Southampton, they surveyed all of the 10 historic burial grounds that the town owns and maintains, and this is one of them. And this was the first one that's been practically all restored. We're now approaching the maintenance phase, and in the survey, the sheets that they have for each grave shows what they found back in 2005 and 2006. I actually got started working on this particular plot, the Rose Elliston plot. Joshua Edward Elliston is my maternal great uncle who married Emma Rose, and I got finished with that in 2006, shortly after the survey was completed by the University of Pennsylvania people. We really got started in earnest in 2009 with a ceremony that established the project as a stewardship agreement with the town and the Southampton Historical Museum. 5 years later, the end of 2014, the perimeter fence was put in, and the completion of the project is just about there. There's some more things to do that are cosmetic, but now we're in the maintenance phase. What you see has become the benchmark for the restoration of burial grounds because of the conditions that were met here, starting with the overhead canopy of trees right down to ground level, which included obviously landscaping work, mowing, trimming, the actual repair and restoration of the stones, the cleaning of the stones, and there's a lot of metal work to be done here. That was all taken apart and repainted and put back. We're very proud of this, and I hope this is entertaining and informative to you and will motivate you to get involved with the restoration of our historic burial grounds. This is our history. These folks went before. We owe them what we have today. Thank you very much.
Well, when I was a child, we could sit on our front porch and people would drive by, seldom, it's not like now, and we'd wave and we knew them. Nowadays, you just don't know people going by when I'm over back where I lived then. I think just the The isolation. I mean, I enjoyed that, and I had good friends out on Cedar Crest, and we used to play at the water and look over the bridge at the crabs and all of that, and it's nice memories, it really is. But yes, we used to drive through here at night just for the scenery and everything, and it would be so beautiful lit up at night looking into the inn itself. And of course they had the little log cabin cottages, and people would come out and spend the summer. It was a nice atmosphere. We had 2 daughters that were raised in North Sea also.
You said that your mother worked on the Somm estate.
Yes, she did.
Now, was that with the current owner, Peter Somm, or his mother,
It was actually
or his father?
the father, Mr. Peter, she called him,
Okay.
and she was quite fond of them. It was nice. It's a beautiful spot, of course. Everybody knows that.
Yes, that's the truth. That's the
Scallop
truth.
Pond and the whole area.
Yeah, that
And
area
we're so lucky it's preserved the way it is.
The village of Sag Harbor, which is divided in half between the towns of Southampton and East Hampton, has over 500 surviving historic properties just in the Southampton side alone. These structures, along with those abundant on the East Hampton side, are concentrated within 2 square miles and all surround its well-known port dating back to the 1700s. One of the oldest houses in Sag Harbor Village is the Captain David Hand House behind me. It was built sometime between the late 1600s and the early 1700s and was moved 3 times before settling in its current location in 1840. David Hand had been a prisoner of war at least 5 times before reaching the age of 20 and managed to escape. He then served on private ships commissioned by the government in war times and again was captured and again escaped. Author James Fenimore Cooper, who came to Sag Harbor Village in order to make money in whaling, was so taken with the personality of Captain David Hand that he based a character on him called Natty Bumppo, included in at least 3 of his novels. Captain David Hand lived to the age of 81 and was predeceased by not 1 but 5 wives, who are all buried next to him in nearby Oakland Cemetery.
The earliest records we have of whaling out of Sag Harbor are in the 1760s, when several ships were sent up northwards to the coast of Labrador. And they were small ships, they were sloops, and they didn't come back with very much oil, but it was enough to get the industry going, to prime the pump, as it were. But unfortunately, the American Revolution came along not too long after that. And of course, Sag Harbor was often garrisoned by British or Loyalist troops, so whaling industry and all other industry came to an end during the American Revolution. It was impossible to send ships out. They would have just been taken by the British Navy, which was often in Gardner's Bay nearby. After the American Revolution, it was the Gardner brothers who sent out the first ship called the Hope, which sadly was rather hopeless. They only came back with about 30 barrels of oil, which of course meant an economic disaster. And as far as we can tell, the Gardner brothers left the business and never had anything else to do with whaling. It became a question of who would start the industry again out of Sag Harbor. And it was 2 men who stepped up to the plate, Benjamin Hunting and Stephen Howell.
In order to understand the uniqueness of Sag Harbor, you must understand the role of whaling in its history. Whaling was the yeast that provided the rising of Sag Harbor. This is the Benjamin Hunting House. It was built by Benjamin Hunting II. His father was the founder of the hunting whaling fortunes in Sag Harbor right after the American Revolution. They fished off the banks of Brazil, and it was a huge success. The ship was the Lucy. It was named after Benjamin Hunting's daughter. The French house, ironically, was built by Howell, the Howell family, who were the partners of the Huntings. They built the house in 1830, but the house was bought in 1860 by the French family.
Prior to the first Great Fire, that fire in 1817, most of the ships in Sag Harbor were owned by individual families or perhaps a business concern of just a handful of men. But in 1818, a new system was developed by one of the local agents named Luther D. Cook and his business partner. And they realized that they could sell shares in ships just as if it was a company. And anybody would be allowed to buy a share in this ship and therefore share in the wealth that the ship brought back. These were known as company ships. And everybody could buy stock, not just the rich families. It would be the blacksmiths, it would be the farmers, it would be the sailmakers, it would be the coopers and the boat builders who now had an active interest in these voyages and an active economic interest. When the ships came home full of oil, they too were reaping the bonanza. The last sailing ship out of Sag Harbor was the brig Myra, and she sailed in 1871 and never returned home. She was condemned in Barbados in 1874. And that, for Sag Harbor, was the end of the whaling industry. Of course, the town itself suffered enormously economically. There was a great decline as it struggled to try and find the next industry, the next opportunity that would keep the town going.
I'm standing in front of the Hunt House. The Hunts had a tremendous history here in newspapering in Sag Harbor, which in fact is the cradle of newspapering on Long Island. Henry Hunt owned a paper called the Sag Harbor Corrector, which was founded in 1822. Newspapering was very tied to politics of the day, and each newspaper carried on its flag and on its masthead the name of the political party it represented. And the Corrector was a very staunch Republican newspaper. Upon Henry's death, his son Alexander took the paper over, and within a year had turned what had been a staunchly Republican newspaper into a Democratic newspaper. So incensed was his younger brother, John, that he started his own newspaper in 1859, July 14th, 1859, the Sag Harbor Express, which at the time proudly flew that it was a Republican newspaper in its flag. After that, there was a series of newspapers. The Express is the one that has stayed on the longest. It eventually consumed the Corrector, and then another upstart newspaper, the News, probably around 1909. I want to mention that the first newspaper here was Frothingham's Long Island Herald, which started in the 1700s. It was the first newspaper in Sag Harbor, and indeed the first newspaper on Long Island. Frothingham was later arrested under the Alien Sedition Act and disappeared for quite a few years, and I'm not sure if he was ever heard from again.
North Haven wasn't always called North Haven. It was Hog Neck pre-1842, but at the time the citizens, residents of Hog Neck were looking for a name more pleasing to modern ears, so they chose the name North Haven. They also toyed around with some other names like North Hog Haven and etc. So some of them were pretty strange and humorous, but North Haven I think is a very appropriate name for North Haven because it is indeed a haven. Although some people tend to think, and there may be some truth to this, that it was named after the Havens family, because that was a predominant name here on North Haven. So, and I'm standing in front of the oldest existing house in North Haven. This is my family's house, and on my wife's side, it was built about 1756 by Constant Havens, and there's the name Havens again. And the second half of the house, it was a half house, a Cape Cod half house divided at the chimney, was built by Joseph Kroll from Cape Cod in the late 1700s. On the other side of the house, we have a extension, a dormer, which was built in 1925. That's the newest part of the house. And the kitchen wing was added by William Rice from Slade of Sag Harbor about 1840-ish. And so we're going to be doing a little tour today of some of the local cemeteries and looking at a couple other structures on North Haven. And it's a beautiful day, and I'm so glad you can join us. Welcome to the North Haven Schoolhouse. And schooling on North Haven actually began in the early 1700s. So this is quite a new schoolhouse. The plaque up above says it was built in 1875, and actually we have to get that fixed. It was really built in the late 1840s. That's when the property was purchased to erect the schoolhouse on this site. Our chapel, which was across the street here on Payne Avenue, was built in 1875. Unfortunately, that burnt down in 1921, I believe, from a lightning strike. And this particular schoolhouse was moved and replaced in about 1891, and it was brought to the Corwin property down the road here and used as a woodshed for many years while the new two-room schoolhouse was used. That schoolhouse was burnt down as well, and that burnt down in, I think it was about 1921, thereabouts as well. The schoolhouse was moved back here again in 1933. The Village Improvement Society brought it back to its original site, although the front door used to face Ferry Road. Payne Avenue didn't even exist until 1891 when the schoolhouse was built in the 1840s. So it was oriented from west to east or east to west. Okay, welcome to our North Haven Community Cemetery. And most of our residents who are laid to rest here are members of the Payne family, except for on the far end we have a couple marble stones which were Hamiltons, but most of these stones are people are related to Mr. John Payne Sr., and he was a Revolutionary War veteran as well as a French Indian War veteran. A number of the stones were broken. I've done a lot of work repairing them, done lots of history on it, and we have a nice little brochure that goes along with them. And the other stone over here where this flag is mounted is Mr. John Payne Sr.'s second born son. This is Mr. Silas Payne, and he was a veteran of the War of 1812. And these are his daughters and daughter-in-laws, son-in-laws, and so on. All these brown stones you see. So we have a lot of history right here. If these stones could talk. Here we are at the Havens Cemetery, and these are only Havens family members. And this cemetery dates back to the 1750s. We have Mr. Constant Havens here. That's C-O-N-S-T-A-N-T. His wife Abigail. And Constant died in 1751. And Abigail died in 1761. 48th year of her age. And this is their son Walter. And Walter died in 1759. And they owned a house. They had a house built in the 1720s on the east side of North Haven, or of what we called the stock farm, which Mr. Faze, who had the watch case factory in Sag Harbor, called it the stock farm because he raised a lot of unique livestock over here, turn of the century. Late 1800s, early 1900s, I'm referring to. And the old Havens house, which was built in the 1720s, actually burnt down July 4th, 1965. It was a beautiful little salt box house. Well, here we are at the South Ferry on the North Haven side. And in the distance, you'll see one of the ferry boats coming in. It's owned by the Clark family. The Clark has operated ferry service here for several generations, I believe, back to the 1820s. And prior to that, we had the Havens, there's that name again, family, which the Clarks intermarried into the Havens at one point. And also during the mid-1800s to the turn of this century, actually not this century, early 1900s, we had the Tyndall family from operating the ferry in competition with the Clark family. So there's been a ferry service here for many, many years, at least back to the early 1700s, and we do have documentation of that. So, beautiful site and beautiful day. Thank you.
We're here today at what is now known as Trout Pond in Noyac, alongside the busy Noyac Road. Trout Pond is a central feature of the Noyac landscape and has been critical in the historical development of the Noyac community. The pond has been the site of settlement for a very long period of time, going back and predating the colonial settlement, having had clans of Native Americans populate around the pond periodically and leaving behind remnants of their life. After the English settlement, the area around the pond was originally developed with a mill and a small dam set up by Obadiah Rogers. And then a succession of families took possession of the mill site and carried on milling activity. The milling activity was not always the same. Originally, the mill was used for what they call fulling wool, designed to finish the making of wool cloth. Subsequently, the mill was used as well for grinding grains as a grist mill, and later on in the 19th century it was also eventually powered by steam, replacing the waterfall, and used as a sawmill. Noyac as a community has several geographical features, including having Jessop's Neck, once also called Farrington's Point and Osborne Neck, and now is the site of the Morton National Wildlife Refuge, and that is also an important feature. But Trout Pond particularly has been the center, if you will, of the eventual commercial and seasonal residential development for which Noyac has become historically known. Its commercial development, its residential and commercial development really intensified under the Eldridge family. Several generations of the Eldridges lived on both sides of the pond and eventually set up a boarding house on the east side of the pond for summer boarders who would come out and become resident during the summers. One of the Eldridge daughters married a very interesting fellow named Henry Chadwick, who is known as the father of baseball and is actually in the Cooperstown Hall of Fame. Henry Chadwick was an Englishman, came to America, was a writer, sports writer, lived in Brooklyn, and he came out in 1873 to summer here, and his daughter Susan fell almost immediately in love with an Eldridge son, and they married. And after that, Chadwick began to buy up property, including buying the mill, which had fallen on hard times in terms of its economics, and buying some of the residential sites, residential lots that were available. And from then on, in the newspapers of America, particularly the Brooklyn Daily Eagle, but also the New York newspapers for which he wrote, he began to incessantly promote Noyac as a summer resort in competition with the more fashionable reputation of the Hamptons on the ocean side of the South Fork. And he brought out and attracted many Brooklynites who settled here, including a publisher of a newspaper for which he wrote, who was also a New York State Senator named William Caldwell. And not far from here is a house on the National Historic Register, the William Caldwell House, built in a magnificent Victorian style that is still preserved. Today, the trout pond is, and the area around it is owned by Southampton Town and is a preserved landscape and will serve certainly the future for the history of the Noyak community.
Welcome to Sagaponack, the easternmost hamlet in the town of Southampton and a mere 28 miles from its western border in Eastport. Like all of Southampton's hamlets, Sagaponack is truly unique. Its surviving farms and high concentration of historic buildings help it to retain its historic character while still being a thriving summer community. The name Sagaponack comes from the Shinnecock Indian word for land of potatoes, indicating farming as a thriving industry of the locale, both historically and today. Sag Main Street is the backbone of Sag's nationally registered historic district, which includes a high concentration of surviving historic structures dating from between the late 1600s and the early 1900s. Behind me is the Pearson Albright House, built in 1692 and being the oldest surviving home in Sagaponack. It is a salt box structure, 3 bays wide and 2 stories tall, with a side-facing gable, a timber frame, and a central entry. It is really remarkable that this house has not been altered over all of these years. Barbara Albright is the current owner, and she is very locally known for the great teas she gives. She's planning a tea later today, but she has agreed to speak with us for a few minutes.
Well, I first came out here in 1950 when I met my husband and he showed me where the family home was. But the old folks were living here at that time, and we came out and we took care of them during the week and on the weekends. And not until they passed away did we actually move in. And I just tell the stories of what they did and how they lived. Well, during the Revolutionary War, we had the Battle of Long Island, and we lost it. And as you know, the men all left. They went to Sag Harbor, then went on down to New York. And there were only elderly people, mothers and children. And we had an army of occupation. And of course, it was a British officer in charge, Major Cochrane, but he had Hessian soldiers. And they decided how. They came down the street, put a chalk mark on your door as to how many people you were to take in. At that time, it was an elderly couple living in here, and the man actually died during that 8-year occupation. It went from 76 to 83. And they had the right to live in the house, they had the right to use your furniture as firewood, and they could do whatever they wanted with everything. And you had to feed them, and you came last. And they had time on their hands, nothing too much to do. So they did what they call today graffiti. I don't know what they called it then. But they carved on the walls, or they did whatever they wanted. So over the years, in the very beginning when the war ended, in 83, they covered it all up with putty. Then years later, they went around and opened up 2 of them, and we put a little frame around it, and there's one of the Hessian soldier, and one of a boat. It's our history of our country. And we have the school books here too. And the first school was built in 1724, and then we had a school right at the edge of our property here, and that was the second one. That was in 1830. And a great-great-grandfather then, he was afraid that the boys would set it on fire, so he made them pick it up and put it in common land in the middle of the street. There was a triangle. Then later on, that school was moved to a piece of property that our family owned on the corner there, and the school was moved there for a couple of years, and then we built the one we have there now, 1885.
This is the Sag School today. The present building is the 3rd Sagaponack Schoolhouse, as you heard Barbara say, and it was built in 1885. Before the centralization of the school districts, each neighborhood had its own public schoolhouse, as well as many private school buildings. Sag School, however, is the only one-room schoolhouse still in operation in Southampton, not to mention being one of very few remaining in the country.
I'm standing in front of a farmhouse, the family farmhouse, built in 1896 by my great-grandfather, John E. White, a farmer here in Sagaponack. That relative who built this homestead was related to one of the earliest settlers here in Sagaponack. His name was Reverend Ebenezer White. He was a graduate of the first divinity school class in Harvard and moved to Bridgehampton as his first calling in 1695. He served that parish for 53 years and came back to Sagaponack and resided there for another 15 before he passed.
The Sag General Store was built in 1878 by Thaddeus S. Edwards as a store and post office. 20 years later, the Hildreth family purchased the store and operated it for the next 90 years or so. It sold everything and anything and is still in operation alongside the post office today. It remains a very popular spot in the summer season and year-round as people gather to get their mail.
I'm Ann Sanford, and I'm standing at the intersection of Ocean Road and Bridge Lane in Bridgehampton. And this is a famous area for me and my family because the house behind me is the Sanford homestead, which was built in 1680 by Ezekiel Sanford, whose family came into Massachusetts in 1632. And he was raised in Hartford, Connecticut, and came down to Long Island, I think seeking more land for his own family. He was 23 at the time. He came into Southampton town, and by 1678, he had been there a few years, and he was a trained wheelwright. The town, and it's obvious in the town records, you can read it, gave him a land grant of 15 acres, and those acres were a bit up Ocean Road, but basically they were behind me. And that was because the town trustees, the town board, wanted to settle and bring families further east in Southampton town, further east from the old town. And he ended up 2 years later, after receiving the grant, building this house. He became moderately wealthy. He was of middling sorts. He also farmed. And a few years later, he was given another grant by the town, and that grant was to build Sag Bridge. The name for Bridgehampton was linked to the building of the bridge. And by 1700, the representative to the New York State Provincial, because we were still under the King of England, the Provincial Assembly petitioned to have Bridgehampton for a parish connected to the church. And the notion was to use the bridge in the name and to pick up Hampton from the name of the town. So Bridgehampton actually connected the area where I stand, which was called Mecox. So Mecox was really a huge area of land, and Sagaponack. But the origin of the name Bridgehampton is about from 1700.
Hi, I'm Julie Green. I'm the curator and archivist at the Bridgehampton Museum here in Bridgehampton, Long Island. I'm also the Long Island local history librarian at the Hampton Library here in Bridgehampton, and I'm standing in front of the historic Beebe Windmill. It's one of 11 standing on Long Island today. It was built in 1820 in Sag Harbor for Captain Lester Beebe by Mr. Tabor and Mr. Skellinger, and it was Captain Beebe died in 1835, and it was left to his son and heirs, and in 1836 Judge Abraham Topping Rose who lived here in Bridgehampton up at the Bull's Head. He and Richard Gelston bought the mill and had it taken apart, and they brought it here to Bridgehampton. This wasn't its original location. Its original location is actually on the west side of Ocean Road, just up a little bit north of here. And it stood there for quite a long time. And in 1882, the mill was moved to the railroad tracks, and a steam engine was put on it. So if there was no wind, we could still grist the mill. And in the early 1900s, about 1899, 1900, the Brooklyn Park Commissioner wanted to purchase the mill to put it in Prospect Park. That was all well and good, and he paid the miller at the time, I believe it was $500 for the mill, and then he realized he couldn't move it. There was no way to get it under bridges and on the railroad. So that got aborted, and a Reverend Robert Davis, who was a summer resident here, he purchased the mill, and then in turn it was bought by John Berwind, who lived here in this house behind me, which is called Minden, which was built in 1911 by John Berwind and his new bride, Catherine Murray Wood Berwind, and they had the mill moved to their property in 1915. It was in their orchard, so it was behind the house. And then in the 1930s, after her husband died, she had the mill moved to this spot, and she gave this as a park with the mill included to the town of Southampton. And the Bridgehampton Museum is the keeper of the keys. And we hold tours here every summer. We do about 2 a month through June, July, and August. One interesting point about the BB windmill is when it was in Sag Harbor, it stood on a high ground. And this is the mill because it was so tall in Sag Harbor that whenever a whaling ship came in to the port, the harbor, they would put a flag on the top of the mill so that everybody in the village could see the top of the mill. And if there was a flag, they knew flag on the mill, ship in the bay. And everybody in the village could go down to the harbor to greet a whaling ship coming back from a long usually a 2-year voyage. This is, the BB windmill is a smock mill. It is 4 stories on a stone foundation. It's the only mill, it was the first mill on Long Island to have a fantail, and the smock mill means that the entire top of the mill actually moves in the direction of the wind, so it rotates around the top.
I'm Tom Halsey. I've lived here in Watermill all my life. My family has lived in Watermill for 11 generations, and it's the best place in the world to live. I wouldn't want to live anywhere else. I've been asked to say a few things about what I have heard from my family over the generations about what Watermill was like. The original settlers of Watermill were ancestors or were descendants from England. They were farmers, and they were good farmers. They didn't really know all about Watermill, however, which has one other very important factor, a bay. Mecox Bay is a place that produces almost as much foodstuff as the land that the settlers began to farm. During the winter months, the farmer baymen didn't have a lot to do, and at one point in about the 1830s, some of the farmers got the idea they or maybe they could build a sailboat that could go on the ice. And it was very successful. The diaries show that the owner of the first boat said that he was surely going 1 mile every minute. And that added really a great deal of interest, and another boat was built. And then, of course, the same thing happened with the ice boats that happened with the sailboats. Competition was on the front burner. However, ice boating was usually a year-round sport, a sport for the year-round people, because the summer homes are usually boarded up by the time that ice boating was was possible with ice.
Around the 1960s, potato farming was king on eastern Long Island. But as the development pressure started to increase and land values were increasing, potato farming started to decline a little bit in popularity. The second home community was expanding. People were coming out here. Farmland was disappearing to subdivisions. The preservation effort helped a lot to preserve a lot of this acreage that is still being cultivated today. Preservation effort has changed drastically over the years and changed from just trying to preserve open space to trying to preserve viable farming operations that exist today. As potato farming started to decline, the diversified agriculture that was here in the late 1800s started to expand again. Farms changed from strictly potatoes to potato and vegetable operations, potato and greenhouse operations. In the early 80s, our farm switched from being potatoes to primarily a greenhouse operation growing annual plants for the second home community to decorate their new estates and new houses. And as our business evolved, we also got into growing vegetables. And today, our farm is very diversified and operates a greenhouse operation in the spring, retail vegetable sales all during the summer and early fall, and we also grow a little bit of nursery stock.
The Watermill Museum is a landmark here in Watermill, and it consists of 3 buildings. The actual grist mill building itself, which dates back to 1644, the Benedict potting shed, and also the Uncle Fred's workshop. This building was built by Edward Howell. He came here in 1640 as a settler, as a colonist, and he was able to acquire a 100-acre mill pond. And when he did, he dammed it, and after he dammed it, he built this mill so that the colonists would have food to eat through the winters, and also animal grain, which they needed to have. We're the only village with a functioning, we think we're the only village in America that has a functioning watermill and windmill, one powered by water, one powered by wind, and they are within a quarter of a mile of each other right here in this hamlet of Watermill. The reason why Edward Howell chose this spot in 1640 is because it has 7 ponds which feed down into Mecox Bay and then down into the ocean. With the water flowing in that direction, it's the perfect place to put a water-powered mill. Very often what would happen back in colonial times is the authorities would call for able-bodied men to come with 2 horses and a yoke to clear what they call the seapoos, open the seapoos. And that is it's the Indian name for little river. And that is so that if the water was not flowing enough, this was a way to get the water to flow stronger so that the mill could grind the grain for the people and the colonists that were living there at that time.
Hi, I'm Charlie Corwith. The windmill you see behind me belonged to my great-great-great-great-grandfather, who purchased the windmill in 1812 in North Haven, Sag Harbor, and disassembled it and moved it to Watermill, and it began to grind grain in 1814. It's been destroyed a couple times by hurricanes. You saw the 38 hurricane took the top right off it. It was laying over the green. It was totally rebuilt, mostly by community labor, in 1987 with the help of Jim Cricker, a millwright from upstate New York, who oversaw the operation. When my grandfather moved it, great-great-great-great-grandfather moved it here, he converted it from a single head mill to a 2-head mill. Inside the mill, there's 2 sets of grinding stones. They used to have to grind corn and stop and clean everything out and switch over to grind wheat. And with the 2 heads, they simply move the gearing inside to drive one head or the other. You don't have to stop and clean the mill out. It's on both the state and national registers of historic places. It's maintained by the Village Improvement Association. It is owned by the Village Improvement Association, the green is. It's a labor of love to keep it in the condition it's in. Recently, the rotted tail shaft was replaced by my first cousin, Ricky Muller, who did all the work on it. The Watermill Green is also known for its flagpole, which is a 110-foot pole that came off a ship that ran aground near Mecox and Flying Point. And they salvaged the mast and put it up here to be the flagpole for the center of the community. And we also have the old millstones here with the memorial plaques to all the soldiers that served from Watermill. And my family has names on all three of them. So we've been here a long time.
My name is Paul Corwith. I am the third generation to be farming in this area. Previous to that, the family ran the windmill and kept a general store in downtown Watermill. In 1907, my grandfather had a few chickens in his backyard and decided he'd rather be a farmer than run a general store. So he sold the store and the house to the Jennings family and bought property on head of the pond from the Forster family and from the Benedict family and started farming. In the background is some of the potato farm. Actually, this property we're standing on used to belong to the Diamond family. Ed Diamond was a potato farmer and he inherited it from his father, who was also a farmer. Times change, economic things change, real estate changes. When the real estate agents come along and offer you 75 years ago, it was $1,000 an acre for real estate, and today it's considerably more than that. The farmer is tempted to build houses or sell the property and have houses built instead of continue to farm. The Peconic Land Trust is probably one of the greatest things that ever happened to the South Fork, and John V.N. Halsey is an outstanding individual who I consider did more for agriculture on the East End than anybody I know of. He has preserved real estate, and Southampton Town and the county, with their program of buying the development rights for property, is what has saved the agriculture on Long Island, on the East End anyway, on the South Fork I should say. Watermill has changed to the point that when I was growing up in a family of 4, we used to have a World Almanac, and I remember looking up and seeing that Southampton had a population of 3,000 people and Watermill had a population of 336 people. And now today I have to wait for 336 cars to go by while I go across the street to get my mail.
I'm Tim Marin. I live on Cobb Road. We moved to Watermill when I was 9 years old in 1950. My mom and dad purchased a piece of property at a public auction on Cobb Road. They couldn't sell the big estates at that time, hence the auction. My dad had lived in hayground all his life, and we became instantly active in the community. In 1952, the Watermill Community Club was founded as a sponsor for the first Little League group out here on the East End. And then this land became available. My father knew the owner of the property who lived out in Hawaii, and they were successful in purchasing the property. About 6 or 7 families got together, bought the property, donated the backland, which is what the park is here, to the community, and kept the frontage kind of to offset their investment. And we started from that, and we built all of these fields with all donated labor and machinery and equipment. The farmers were extremely active in the project. That's kind of a brief history of the field. It's provided us with a tremendous number of opportunities for our children and children from other communities to have a safe place to play. On Montauk Highway, we have the Watermill Community House. Beautiful old building that was built in the late 1800s as a chapel. There was no church in Watermill, so they built the chapel, and that was the church for many, many years here in Watermill. I played on the first Little League team in 1952. I've stayed active in the community ever since. I've been a trustee for I can't even tell you how many years. And it really epitomizes to me what a community is about. It's been a great place to grow old. It's been a great place to raise my family and to be raised here in the community. And I attribute that to all of the organizations that are part of this community.
Good afternoon. My name is Bill. This is the Green Thumb family farm. This is our dad, Raymond and Peachy. They started this farm stand in about 1963. We have their four children here, Joanne, Larry, and Patty over here, and some of their children. We have 3 generations involved in the farm now. We've been doing the farm stand over 50 years. We're located in Watermill, Long Island, and we've been here since our farm has been in our family since 1700. Once we started the farm stand, we were conventional vegetable growers, and then around 1976, the 4 children decided that we wanted to move into organics. After the humanistic movements of the 1960s and early 70s, we decided organic was the way to go. So with support from our mom and dad, Peachy and Ray, we took the farm organic. We became certified organic in 1990. We also have started another farm stand with the next generation down in Hayground.
I'm John Halsey, John L. Halsey. This is our daughter Jennifer on my left, Amy on my right. We're on our family farm in Mecox, close to Hayground. We've been here for 12 generations, and the 13th is currently asleep, taking a nap, or in first grade. The history of this farm is no different than the history of Long Island. It's a history of change. And the farmers that are still here have adapted to the retail marketing strategy for farming. There are still a few wholesale farmers, but nothing like it was in the 40s and 50s.
The core of Hayground, as the community evolved, was this area that is bordered by Windmill Lane, Hayground Road, Montauk Highway, and it forms a triangle that ends at about the railroad tracks today. And in the early period, it took shape as a kind of common ground that had a variety of purposes. The Hayground Burial Ground was incorporated in 1913, and this was at the time that Rufus Rose, who lived across the highway in the house that's now the Lauren Copen Antique Store, gave a bequest to families in the immediate community, and that was really when the cemetery became somewhat more formally established. Another aspect of the Hayground Commons area that's worth noting is the windmill that was located, as I mentioned, at the top of the hill. It dated from the early 19th century, and when it was decommissioned in 1919, it was the longest operating windmill in this part of eastern Long Island. And it also had an unusual last chapter of its existence in that it served as kind of a historic reuse site. In 1916, the windmill had really lost a lot of its purpose, and that was the year that it served as the setting for a Mary Pickford film called Hulda from Holland. The windmill was supposed to evoke a Dutch setting, and the extras in the film were neighborhood people, and there are lots of farmers and kids who were dressed up in what were supposed to be Dutch-looking costumes, and they acted in the film.
Hi, my name is Bernard Corrigan, and I'm being filmed for this piece because I happen to live in Hayground here from 1947 when I was born at my father's garage, Corrigan Service Station. And it was an institution at the time, if you will. Another unique thing about Hayground is there was an airport here, Hampton Airport. Now, if you drive off of 27 and you go up Hayground Road to the railroad tracks and you look to your left, there's a red barn off to the left there, you'll see. And that is the old Hamptons Airport hangar. And there is film of planes coming in and out of there, which my father had taken, who was known as B.J. Corrigan, and he loved planes as well as cars and racing, and he took photos and film of the planes coming in and out. It's has been a potato barn for a long time. Since then was owned, and I believe still is, by the Conklin family. And at the time, though, celebrities would come into the Hampton Airport, land, go off and do their thing, and come back and leave. Many people would, of course. And one of the celebrities that would come in was Howard Hughes.
Okay, hi, my name is Paul Rogers, and we're standing here at the edge of the one-time Hayground Commons, which is long since buried, but it used to be a very prominent commercial hub in the Hamptons back in the 1700s. And if you look at the sketches from local history, you can find maps that will show this important commercial intersection that we used to call Hayground Commons. It included the Hayground Schoolhouse, and actually that building that you see through the cherry tree is the fourth Hayground Schoolhouse that was built, I'm not sure of the date, but it is the fourth Hayground Schoolhouse and acted as a school up until the early 1950s, at which point the Hayground students, or the Hayground School, became part of the Watermill School District, which was part of Southampton. Hayground Commons extended from here to Montauk Highway, which you can see in the distance. And if you look to your right, you can see a clearing where it used to come through the trees. And this was actually part of the road, was a road that encircled the northerly part of Hayground Commons. So it was a much larger area. And as with many commons in New England at the time, people would bring their cattle to graze here. There were commercial establishments on the perimeter of it. There was a blacksmith shop. We were perpetually finding bricks that came out of a foundation on the property over here where my son built a house, and old horseshoes from the blacksmith shop. So it's a pretty neat old area. The house was built in the 1840s, and it's the sister house of the house in Bridgehampton that's being renovated now by the town of Southampton. It's the main center section was actually built as an addition to a portion of a house that was on the right-hand side that was a gambrel-shaped house built in the 1700s, and that was destroyed in the hurricane of 1938. And my wife and I recently added this addition, which was a gambrel-shaped addition mimicking the original. My great-grandfather, or possibly grandfather, purchased the second Hayground Schoolhouse, which originally sat on that property, and moved it onto our property, and it has been used ever since as a residence. The interior of it is mostly intact. There's wainscoting around the exterior of the building that's wide pine boards, and you can see places where the school children carved their initials in the wood, or they exercised their compasses and carved little circles, or they made a beautiful sailboat when the teacher wasn't looking, I'm sure. We like to think that Hayground is full of eccentric characters, and so that's where they started their education, was in that school. So the schoolhouse is part of a property that includes several old farm buildings. My ancestors were farmers. They farmed potatoes and chickens, and at one point we're farming over 150 acres of potatoes, and we still have carried on some of that tradition. My wife raises chickens and berries, blackberries, and on a small scale, but my son has started a nursery, which is becoming productive. We have about 8 acres of nursery stock that we're growing, and we're looking into the possibility that we might be able to go back into more serious farming in the very near future.
Hi, I'm Mike Babinski here at Babinski Farm Stand. We grow produce for Babinski Farm Stand. Been here 4 generations. We started way back in 1900s, I guess, by my great-grandfather. It used to be a strictly potato farm, but we have to do what we have to do now and back into vegetables. My uncle used to run a dairy farm. It was one of the last ones on Long Island. Grew up in hayground all my life. Hayground has a diverse soil. North of the highway is a little lighter ground, a little sandier. Over closer to the ocean is loamy, holds moisture very well, heavier. Some things don't grow well over here. They grow better on the north of the highway. But all areas were pretty good for potatoes.
Welcome to Southampton Village. This is where the English settlers traveled to after arriving at Conscience Point and North Sea in 1640. They first settled at the north end of Old Town Pond before relocating to the Main Street area about 8 years later. Southampton Village was incorporated in 1894, well into the development of its summer colony, which resulted in a lot of historic structures being built. Today, notwithstanding strong developmental pressures, Southampton Village still has a high concentration of these architectural treasures, dating from the late 1600s to the 1980s, and designed by such notable architects as McKim Mead and White and Norman Jaffe. The Thomas Halsey Jr. House was built about 1680 for the son of one of Southampton's earliest English settlers. It is a 2-story salt box with a center entrance, diamond-paned leaded glass windows, a large central brick fireplace, and cedar shingle siding with large exposures. It is said that the home originally faced south, but was turned to face the street, enlarged and renovated, but that would have happened well before the turn of the 20th century. Following the trend of naming one's summer cottage, the Peabodys named the Thomas Halsey Jr. House Hollyhocks. In 1952, the Society changed its name to the Southampton Historical Museum when they leased their first permanent home from the village, the Rogers Mansion on Meeting House Lane. In 1958, they purchased the Thomas Halsey Jr. House from the heirs of the Peabodys. In 2003, a 4-year-long restoration of the house was completed, ensuring its survival for many more generations. The Southampton Historical Museum opens the house in the warmer months, offering the public a rare and enjoyable view of Southampton during colonial times.
My name is Penelope Wright. I grew up in Southampton, and I am sitting in front of Hildreth's, which is one of Southampton's oldest stores, if not its oldest. Hildreth's, Herrick's, Corwin's is very old. And when I was a kid, we used to come to Hildreth's to buy all of our patterns and all of our fabric for my mother to make most of our clothes. So actually, this section right here was full of every pattern you can imagine, and we would always weigh in on what our dresses might want to look like, and then my mother would make them for us. And since we had 4 girls who were, well, there were 6 of us, but 4 roughly the same age, well, 3 roughly the same age, we would very often have identical outfits. And we didn't have a lot of clothes, so we tended to remember the clothes that we did have. Like, we had skirts that we called our movie skirts because we were allowed to go to the movies once. And we wore the skirts. And so we sort of all remembered our clothing from our childhood. And one year my mom made us quilts out of remnants of all those pieces of fabric. And of course we could identify every one. So we loved Hildreth. And way a long time ago, as some of you know, Hildreth was also selling cheese and crackers and many things. It was sort of a grocery store. When we were young, the north side part of the store had clothing for men. And so we loved Hildreth. We still do. It was great growing up well, we grew up sort of on Main Street, down the way a bit, but when we were young, in the 50s, if we came into the village, we tended to know everyone we saw. If we saw someone who was unfamiliar, we took notice of that. So it was quite a different place from what it is today. One of the places we loved to go to the most was Corwith's, which was a pharmacy. And the building is still there, and it's on the northwest corner of Main Street and Job's Lane. And it was a pharmacy, Corwith's Pharmacy. But in addition to selling pharmacy products and beauty products, there was a soda fountain that was a favorite place of everyone we knew. And in these village shops and pharmacies, the same people tended to work there for a very long time. So we knew the guy who delivered things from the pharmacy. We knew the woman who worked behind the counter. And the best thing that we could look forward to, well, there were two things. One was having a hot fudge sundae in a cold metal cup with really good hot fudge poured on it. And the other was that we would go to our dentist, who had an office upstairs, and after our dentist visit, he would give a prescription for an ice cream cone. He was smart. He knew where the business came from. And it was a great treat for us, so it was win-win. And we would go down and cash in our little prescription and have an ice cream cone.
Hi, my name is Brenda Simmons, and presently I am the director of the Southampton African American Museum and also the assistant to Mayor Epley in the village of Southampton. I grew up here in the wonderful village of Southampton, let's say close to 60 years ago, we'll say. And it was an interesting and exciting childhood I had. I had a beautiful family. I had 5 other siblings. And we grew up about 2 or 3 blocks away from here on Halsey Avenue. We had snowball fights, and we had a penny candy store next door to us. We had Arts Market down the road where they had the best heroes, and they had ice cream sandwiches. I mean, it was just such a wonderful childhood. But growing up here with my children, I always want to expose them to the culture. And generally, I would always have to bring them into the city because there's really not a lot of African American community of culture here. There's a lot of community here, but not a lot of the culture here. So I would have to really take them into the city where a lot of my relatives lived. So later on, I decided that, you know, we have a community, a black community here on Hillcrest, and that's where the museum is, the Southampton African American Museum is, and it's Wynwood Way and Miller Road. That's the African American community, which is a couple of blocks from here. And I moved there from Halsey Avenue. I was born and raised on Halsey Avenue, which is on this side of it, but after I got married and had my children, I moved and had built a house on Miller Road. And at that time, it was just such endearing, you know, it was that kind of community back then where if you ran out of bread, or if you ran out of sugar or flour, you can go knock on next door neighbor's door and they had the bread for you, or they had a cup of sugar for you, or they came by and they brought you cookies. I mean, it was such a wonderful, what you call a community back then when I grew up. And I just really loved it, and I really do miss that, you know, and I'm really hoping and trying to see if we can bring that back. But unfortunately, a lot of things change. As we know, things change. And right now, as I was saying, we have the African American Community Museum that's on 245 North Sea Road. And we want to establish that that was back in the 40s was a juke joint and a gathering place for the black community many years ago. And also a barbershop and a beauty parlor there. And my Aunt Evelyn Baxter, which I want to give her props, she was a beautician there. And my aunt was one of those special people who really taught us as young ladies how to be a lady. She taught us how to sit and how to walk and how to present ourselves as ladies. And a lot of the young women my age now remember her that way. And also, you know, we like to preserve the history. Right now I'm actually standing by Pierce Concert's gravesite here, and we have fought to struggle to save his homestead, and unfortunately we went through some changes with that, and we're going to get updated with that, where we believe that the house will be preserved, hopefully, and we'll still be able to you know, acknowledge and save his legacy. And right now they did have a ferry, Pierce Concert Ferry, that they reenacted, that's on Pond Lane. So I have to try to take that as a positive, but I have to say that it has been a struggle, and you know, we have to understand the importance of our history. And I think that's something that Southampton Village right now is struggling through, is preserving our history. So I have grown up here, I love it here, I go on vacation, I do my thing, but I have a heart for this community, and I love the village of Southampton. Thank you.
Not to be confused with the town of Tuckahoe in upstate New York, the hamlet of Tuckahoe in Southampton is east of Shinnecock Canal, west of North Sea, and is about 4.5 square miles in size. It was named by the Native Americans after a plant with edible roots, which we now know today as Jack in the Pulpit. And that name, Tuckahoe, unlike other hamlets, has remained unchanged ever since. Tuckahoe is very scenic and remains less developed than some of Southampton's other hamlets. It is heavily wooded and lies along the Peconic Bay to the north, which provides for many breathtaking and scenic views. Tuckahoe has 4 golf courses: the Southampton Golf Club, the Sebonack Golf Club, the National Golf Links of America, and the Shinnecock Golf Club just behind me. The Shinnecock Golf Club was designed by Stamford White of the noted turn-of-the-century architectural firm McKim, Mead & White, and it has changed very little over time. In fact, recently it underwent a renovation, removing some of its later additions and returning it to a more original appearance. But along with Tuckahoe's rich golf heritage, the hamlet also contains several historic structures, such as schools, a great potato barn, and houses ranging from the early 1800s to the late 1940s. The potato barn behind me is purportedly one of the largest surviving potato barns in Suffolk County. It's referred to as the Roscoe Barn, but was built prior to that family's ownership, probably in the 1920s. Today, it's a storage facility for a home furnishings company, but despite its wear and tear, remains one of Southampton's most favorite agricultural buildings.
Harry White there, he's standing on the beach here from down the road down here. You know, yeah, he's one of them.
Picture.
And I'm by the boat. My father's helping me. My brother's in the bow, and old Pete, he's in the bow, rowing on one of oars. That's all we ever do. We go cod fishing all winter long. I loved it.
Did your daughters ever watch you go fishing or go on the boat with you?
Oh yeah, I took Marianne with me. Oh yeah.
They went out on the boat.
They helped me. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. Yep. Oh yeah.
They learned how to fish.
Yep.
From their dad.
Yeah. Well.
And they probably were helpful when they got old enough.
They were. Oh sure. Yeah. I used to take her years ago. We used to go after eels during the night. You know. She complained the eels were running around on our eggs there. Yeah. I go during the winter time when it froze up like this, take my spear, go down there, I spear a couple bushel of eels. You know, I come home.
Through the ice?
Yep.
Oh, I wish I had pictures of that. That's fantastic.
And I come home and I fillet them all up, cut them up, you know, and I put them in, tie them up in packages, pound and 2 pound packages. Yeah. You know, I never could get enough of the town, and people just loved it, you know. Yeah. I'd go from house to house.
And sell your fish.
Yeah.
Isn't that fantastic?
My father, when I was a kid in East Hampton, and I'm against it. We peddled fish every week, end of the week.
Your father was a fisherman also?
Oh, yeah. Yes. Fishing farmers. That's all we had.
His brothers.
Yeah.
So all
My
your
brothers down there now, yeah, they all got traps set and everything, you know.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
This hamlet's history is unique in that it is most closely associated with the town's Native American heritage. In 1703, the Shinnecocks negotiated a lease giving the town's early settlers all of the land between Southampton Village and Canoe Place, totaling 3,600 acres. In 1859, the Shinnecocks were deeded Shinnecock Neck, where the reservation is today.
Hakame. Now you're speaking our language, and when you say Shinnecock and Peconic and Ronkonkoma, Patchogue, Quiog, you're speaking our language. It's a beautiful ancient language which we appreciate and are still using, and our children often reflect the names, in their names, the language of the Shinnecock people. And this is what we have built the Shinnecock Museum to do, is to preserve that history. One of the best ways of showing it has been the artistry of David Bun Martin, who is here this morning to welcome you and has a very wonderful talent. So I always say that we knew he was talented when he was a teenager and went off to college. And he got a degree in art and he came back and he still is an artist. Only he was an educated artist. And he never lost his love for Shinnecock and our beautiful history, and he has filled the museum with murals of his work. And I'd like everybody to know David Bun Martin. Would you like to say something?
Thank you very much. Yeah. Welcome everybody to our museum. It's an honor to be with everybody today, and to be with Mrs. Hale, the president of our board of directors, and with Becky on our Cultural Resources Committee for the tribe. And we're very proud of our museum. As you know, we have 10,000 years or more of history here on Long Island. And one of the things that we like to do here is to share some of that history with everybody, and to reinvigorate some of that history for all concerned, you know, our own people, and then to share those things with our surrounding communities. And it's been a great joy to do that. And so we have one of the finest museums of Native American culture probably in the northeast of the northeastern part of the country. The only Native American owned museum on Long Island. And we opened our doors, as you know, in 2001. So since that time, you know, it's been a community effort. It's an ongoing thing where it's a work in progress, you know, it's a never-ending thing where you can refine things and you work with the resources you have. We have elders, we have community volunteers, we have very dedicated people from the local community who really feel very strongly that they like to share in the communicating of our culture with the world. And as I said, it's a great joy and honor to be part of it. I've been the director since 2003. The founding committee board of the museum hired me in '94 to do the series of murals that you see on the walls. And I thought, well, how best to show an overview of our history that would be easy to understand, you know, from ordinary people who come in and might be, you know, they might be taken over by stereotypes from movies and TV. That's where most people learn about Native American culture, and for the most part, it's you know, it's really not factual at all. It's distorted and it's romanticized. So came up with the idea of a walk with the people, which is our main exhibition. That's been here since we started. So since I'm an artist, I came up with doing some murals, you know, which you can, when we first started, all we had basically were pictures on the walls. And we have 6 cultural phases of our history. It's been a joy to put it all together. And then we have a wonderful staff, a committee, a board of directors. It's second to none, that is so supportive. And their number one interest and is keeping being stewards of the culture, really, you know, for the tribe. You know, the culture, past couple of years, we had a wonderful grant, and we've brought back some very ancient activities, very ancient skills and arts of our people, such as finger weaving, dugout canoe fabrication. This is something we did from the beginning, thousands of years ago. We brought it back in the last 5 years, you know, from, you might say, dormancy. You never say you really forget something altogether. It's still in the back of your mind, you know. But we brought it forward again. We were able to exercise all these wonderful skills, you know, the finger weaving, twining, very ancient skills that our people did in order to survive. They utilized every single part of nature. You know, nothing was wasted, nothing was destroyed.
To me, these are celebrations. David is one of the most awesome people on this reservation, allowing him to bring back our memory, our persistence of memory kind of thing, what's in our DNA. This is our DNA, this is our heritage, our culture, this is everything. And it was disrupted in 1640 and became a place where people could take advantage of our goodness and our kindness and our beautiful way of life, because a lot of people called us animals that could talk. And we are not animals that can talk, although we love the animals. We are human beings. The Creator made us that. We did not come from someplace else. We've always been here. So this museum is a constant reminder of this is how it was, this is how it probably can never be again because of all the disruption and the unsettlement that came along, you know, in the 1600s. But we still have an obligation and a responsibility to educate the people at large so that we can stop some of this crazy overdevelopment and pollution and total destruction of the beautiful waters and forests and grasslands and everything, and the people. There were 13 tribes before the Europeans came here. We're down to 4 tribes. And, you know, we can't change the past, but we can direct the future. So we ask the town of Southampton to remember life did not begin in 1640.
That's beautiful. That's one reason we have the Wigan Village. And the Wigan Village is a living village. It's on the property of the Shinnecock Nation Cultural Center and Museum. And Wigan means good gathering place, and that's what we have. And when you step into it, you have stepped back in history, because immediately in front of you is a little wigwam, and on your right you will see a wetu, and that would be a home for 2 families. It would be a 2-fireplace building, and we enjoy seeing school children come in and be totally amazed. This is not a toy, and this is not a board game or a video game. It is a village where you can walk into the garden area, you can walk into the community fireplace where families bring their food and cook together and laugh and talk, and go into the wigwam and sit around the fire and understand how the grandparents could talk to you and give you your history. Out in the garden, your mothers would teach you how to plant and how to cultivate and how to protect the food supply all winter, and how the fathers and uncles would come in with wonderful things that they had hunted out in the forest, and how they would take young boys out to teach them the skills of supplying food to your family. And don't forget, we had the ocean, and we had to explore that too. So the Wigan Village brings all these things to life, and we want every school child on Long Island to see the village and to experience that, along with the other things that we have to offer here at the Shinnecock Nation Cultural Center and Museum.
In 1870, the Long Island Railroad sliced through Shinnecock Hills as it made its way eastward and in 1883, Shinnecock Hills was purchased for $101,000 by the Long Island Improvement Corporation with the intention of developing the hills into a summer colony superior to nearby Southampton Village. That vision was not realized, but glimpses of it remain in the form of several well-designed historic structures, such as William Merritt Chase's home, designed by McKim, Mead & White, and the Shinnecock Hills train station. Nestled in the southeastern corner of the hamlet of Shinnecock Hills and bordering on the western boundary of Southampton Village lies the former campus of the William Merritt Chase Summer School of Art, where students studying plein air painting resided while the school was in operation from 1891 to 1902. It was the first open-air painting school in the United States. After that, this little 9-acre neighborhood became a unique enclave associated with art and the Southampton summer colony of the early 1900s. Today, all but one of the 12 original structures survive, such as this one behind me, known as the Kent Cottage. All or most of the cottages were likely designed by Janet and William Hoyt and their contractor, John Aldrich, and are stylistic fusions of the Dutch colonial, shingle, Japanese, arts and crafts, wigwam, and colonial revival styles. The neighborhood and the site were purposely designed in a rustic character and largely absent of ornamentation, which contrasted significantly from the professionally designed Victorian-styled estates being realized in nearby Southampton Village at the same time. Welcome to Hampton Bays. Originally known as Good Ground, this area of Southampton was settled in 1738 and not renamed until 1922. Before 1738, Hampton Bays was occupied by Native Americans and used by the townspeople for hunting, fishing, harvesting, and grazing. Historically and today, Hampton Bays is comprised of several unique and distinctive communities, such as Ponquag, Rampasture, Springville, Squiretown, Tiana, Newtown, and Red Creek.
Hello, I'm Pat Hagen-Tucio, and I'm standing in front of the Prosper King House, which is a landmark in Hampton Bays. I was born and brought up here in Hampton Bays, and it's been an absolutely beautiful place to look back on as your hometown. Hampton Bays was like one big family years ago. You knew everyone, you loved everyone, and you helped everyone. I think we had a much simpler life. We played games like hopscotch, jump rope, and one of our biggest thrills was to go to the canal and go snapper fishing with a bamboo pole. My family has been in Hampton Bays for 7 generations. My father was very active in settling the fire department, the water district, and was a very, very interested member of the American Legion. Hampton Bays is no doubt growing, but I'm hoping we can keep that small town feeling and attitude that has made us a very special piece of Southampton town.
I worked on the water all my life. There was always something to do on the water. When something like petered out, there was something else came in afterwards. Like when I was in school, this place was solid full of hard clams. From the reservation up to Patchogue and past. And we got $2 a bushel for chowders and $3 a bushel for little neck clams. So you think that's terrible, but it was good because the people that were carpenters and painters and everybody else got $4 a day. And we could make that in no time. So I thought, what's the use of going to college? I might as well stay here and do this. And we'll get a little set every year and it'll keep going. But the only thing is we didn't get a set every year. So then it went into scalloping. We had plenty of scallops and crabs, blue claw crabs, and steamers. that would keep us going. My ancestors, when they came here, they built big boarding houses for the people who come from the city and come out here. And my great-grandfather had one on the corner there where the road leaves the creek there. And he took gunning parties. He had a big fence there, and he had, those days they could use live stool. So he had geese and ducks right there on the shore. And they could practically hunt all year long because they could shoot snipe at that time. My grandfather hunted so much that he went on an island right across the way here, and they named it after him. It's Lane's Island over there.
Well, I was born in Hampton Bays in 1924, and at that time, you know, the town was very young, very few homes in Hampton Bays, and they used to come out on the train on the weekends to the places they stayed out here. Well, my father, he was in the life-saving over at they had a station over on the ocean then, and when they went to work, they had to row across the bay over to the ocean. I don't know, he was in the Coast Guard about 5 or 6 years probably. And there was a lot of shipwrecks in them days. One reason because when they put the lighthouse in Hampton Bays, some of them coming from Europe, of course they had no communication like we have now. And when they seen the lighthouse, they thought it was Montauk Lighthouse. And they ended up on a beach.
Welcome to East Quogue. East Quogue was originally settled in 1673 and was known as Fourth Neck. In 1852, its name changed to Atlanticville, and in 1891, its name changed to East Quogue, a name that has stuck ever since. The hamlet is just under 9 square miles, and more than 150 original historic structures still survive. Many of the surviving historic structures are associated with East Quogue's founding families, among them the Phillips, the Carters, the Fosters, the Downs, the Reeves, the Howells, and the Squires, and the Jacksons, and many of those families still live in this hamlet.
Hello everyone, you're here in East Quogue, right on Main Street, and we're in front of the East Quogue Historical Museum, which used to be, the parsonage was here. The minister used to live here. He no longer lives here, but now we have use of the bottom floor. And next to it is the Wesley House, which is a thrift shop. And over here on the left is the church, the East Quogue Methodist Church.
As a child, I became very interested in the history of East Quogue, starting to collect it in grade school. Since then, I have continued with the history. I primarily loved to walk road by road and photograph the houses that I knew that were here before World War II, and then continue with the updates of what has happened to these homes up until today with the difference in the changes. You can see here, you know, the pictures of where the East Quogue School was, and the different, these are pictures of things before, and then we have the children try to guess where these areas were. So right now today I have several books at home. In fact, I have one whole room in my house filled with books on East Quogue, and we will continue doing the history for East Quogue. This actually belonged to a historian from Hampton Bays who left it to me, Charlotte Lopez. And I'm in the Asbury House now. I am the treasurer, historian. We all work together, help out together. and we hope to continue collecting the history for many years to come.
My name is Mary Phillips. My husband is Lee Phillips, and he's a native of East Quogue. This is a Christmas tree that we put up, and then we decided to keep it all year, so we changed the name to Tree of Life. And we, my husband and I, went and got these little seashells from Corjay, I think it was, and the children put their names and their dates and decorated them. So it's now a Halloween tree, and we'll change it as the seasons come. This room is filled with the collection of Mr. Edward Downs, and that's a picture of him over there, and this is his home. Up here is a picture of him when he was about 4 years old, and that's the old homestead.
I'm standing on the porch of the Foster Downs house, prominently located in downtown East Quogue and one of the town's designated landmarks. This house was built in 1857 for Captain and Mrs. Josiah Foster. It is a late Greek Revival structure with later Italianate-style embellishments. Josiah Foster was born in East Quogue and purchased this property from his father, Halsey Foster, in 1857 for $400. Halsey Foster was a 10th generation Foster from Christopher Foster, the original Foster in Southampton, who came to Southampton about 1650. Halsey Foster's son was Josiah. Josiah was a whaling captain, and Josiah had the house built for him. In 1887, the house was purchased by Ida Squires Downs for $3,125. Ida was the wife of Captain James Edward Downs and was also East Quogue's first school teacher. James was the son of Sylvester B. Downs, who was instrumental in the construction of the Methodist Church next door in 1852. This house continues to be owned by the Downs family today. Welcome to Quogue. In 1659, 19 years after the English settlers arrived in North Sea, the area from Canoe Place in Hampton Bays to West Hampton was purchased from the Montaukett Indians and was originally called Quaquanotic by the Native Americans and later shortened to Quogue. Because of this purchase, by 1666, the town of Southampton had more than doubled in size, encompassing more than 100,000 acres, about 170 square miles, a huge amount of land for that time, larger than the nearby towns of East Hampton and Southold. Structures began being built in Quogue in the early 1700s along Quogue Street, with its earliest families being the Posts, the Fosters, the Jessops, the Herricks, the Howells, and the Cooks. And until the early 19th century, life in Quogue was pretty quiet.
My family, my mother was born here in Santa Maria. My father came from Italy way back in 1905, I guess. Started from nothing and worked up a nice business, a couple of nice businesses, which I followed in first landscaping business, and then after that, my son Randy got into it. We got into heavy construction, and that's what we do now, but I'm retired. I've been retired for, 15, 18 years, I guess. But I had a hobby. My hobby was collecting antique tractors, John Deere tractors. I'm partial to John Deere tractors. I had 15 of them. A lot of fun doing it. Belonged to the Long Island Antique Power Association, the club we have. And I served on the, I had served 2 years in the Army in 1950-51. I served on a village board here in Quogue for 30 years as a trustee, and I was deputy mayor. I never wanted to be mayor. I could have been, but I never wanted because I was busy with my own business, and I said, I don't need that. But anyway, in the fire department, I served I had over 50 years active in the Quogue Fire Department also. and seen a lot of changes here. Quogue, though, is I don't know if you can find a nicer place to live. Quogue, I've been around a little bit, but Quogue is unique. It's had very good zoning, early zoning, and it's a very nice place to live. And zoning has kept it down. Mostly residential, no big businesses. Well, the Ford dealer here is the biggest business, but no bars or anything like that. We never wanted that. And I know while I was on a board, we had a lot of opportunity to. Even one time I remember McDonald's wanted to come in Quogue here and build a McDonald's up over here by the Ford place, but we said no, we don't need you here. But anyway, we kept it low key, and it's still that way. And it's very nice, and it's a nice place to live. And it's been very good to me and my family as far as making a living, and we always made a very good living here, and not just in Quogue, but on the whole East End.
In 1844, Quogue was the second stagecoach stop in a 3-day journey from Brooklyn. Later, the Long Island Railroad had reached Riverhead, resulting in farmers taking in boarders as a result during the summertime. In 1870, when the railroad was extended to Southampton, 13 boarding houses had been realized along Quogue Street, and by the turn of the century, many private summer homes built as well. Quogue Village incorporated in 1928 and contains nearly 400 surviving historic structures built before 1940. The Quogue Library Association was organized in 1896, and its first dedicated building was opened the following year on property gifted by local residents. It was expanded in the 1920s and in the 1990s and is considered today as the center of village activity.
I'm Nancy Mullen, and I've owned this house here on Quaquanantuck Lane for 35 years. I have been blessed to live in this house for 35 years. It's a house that was built in 1903. The plans were drawn by George Skidmore, and it is just, I am still 35 years later discovering new details and new beautiful things that he thought to do. So it has been a pleasure to live here. I'm only the 4th owner. I have never put in central air conditioning because it doesn't need it. The house was built to keep the cool air inside. In 2003, the house was 100 years old, so I gave it a birthday party. And we had a cake and about 103 people. And I invited everyone who I knew had either lived here or been a regular here. So there were people going back to the 30s who remembered growing up here. It was a really fun party. At that side of the dining room is a half-round room that we call the conservatory. That when you go there, you'll see it's one of our favorite rooms. When I bought the house, the conservatory was hanging off the house like this, and the first contractor who came in said, oh, well, just tear it off, take it down. And so I decided he was not the contractor for me. But after we'd been here for several years and we were really enjoying the house, particularly that room in the summer, I ran into a previous owner on the street, and she said, how do you like it? I said, oh, we love it. Are you enjoying the conservatory? I said, yes. And she said, but isn't it a shame that the windows don't open? Because the windows have an arch at the top, so it looks like there's no place for the sash to go when you open the window. But they'd lived here for 25 years and they'd never discovered that the windows actually go down. And contractors, when you tell them that, they said, oh, well, that's not going to work. The rain's going to get in there and they're going to swell and it'll melt. Well, it's 100 and now 11 years later, and they're still working beautifully.
The first mention of Quogue, meaning Little Quogue, in the Southampton town records is in 1707. It's probably the smallest hamlet in the town, situated between Quogue and Westhampton and encompassing about 1.3 square miles of land. The first summer residence was built for Reverend John Patton, and for many years afterwards, Quogue was known as a summer place for men of faith and educators. The area has about 100 surviving historic resources and remains a tranquil locale, but not without its own bits of drama and intrigue. Quogue was the home of Alexander Winfield Eager, who was locally known as the Buffalo Bill of the East End. Born in 1878, he was quite the presence and personality here in Quogue, riding around the hamlet as its first mounted policeman in full Western regalia. When his days as a patrolman ended, he spent many years giving riding lessons and trail rides. He had long flowing hair, a mustache, and a long beard, and was locally beloved until his death in 1956.
Well, I didn't grow up here. I came here when I became married. When I was married in 1930, my engagement was announced in 1938 on the day of the hurricane. And I didn't know whether I was engaged to somebody missing or alive or what. Well, Quogue, we pay Southampton taxes. We don't belong to Westhampton. And it's a tiny little unit of its own. And it has its own little group of people that are all very nice. It was what was special was when Buffalo Bill was here. Did you ever hear him? And of course he's gone, and that was very special. But he used to ride his horse, and he'd ride down to the village, gallop away, and he was very colorful. He lived right here in Quogue. He lived right near the Catholic Church. He used to gallop on his horse down to the village. And he was very colorful and very friendly, and he was a character. I guess he was our best character. And that was back in 39, 40. That's when I came here. This was just a field. There were 3 houses on the whole point. Now it is so built up. We were driving in New Jersey, and I made sketches of different buildings that I liked, and we sort of copied them. I've forgotten where we saw this wonderful gatehouse that I copied the garage from. So it was in Far Hills, New Jersey, or somewhere out.
Mom, what was the style of this house, though?
Well, it's supposed to be French provincial, but I don't think it's very true. It's
It is very French provincial and colonial revival as well. Was there a particular architect that you worked with?
Yeah, Howard Stites, who had an office, I think, here in town. He was our architect. We had the most wonderful builders, and the head of it we called Uncle Bill. And there were 4 or 5 of them, and they had the best time building this house. And when we had to re-roof part of it, we found a note under one of the shingles, and all the workmen had signed their names. And I still have it.
Oh, great.
Which I thought was kind of nice. Yes. They were a great group of builders and very enthusiastic about building this house, which you don't find, I don't think, anymore.
Congratulations to Southampton on its 375th anniversary. I'm Janice J. Young, a member of the Landmarks and Historic Districts Board. I'm one of about 4,500 residents in the hamlet of Flanders. If this is the North Fork and this is the South Fork, Flanders is right here on the north side of the South Fork. It's almost 12 square miles located along the south shore of the Peconic Bay estuary. According to the Flanders Hamlet Heritage Report issued earlier this year, the land was purchased from the Accabots in 1648 and the Shinnecocks in 1659. However, the first permanent resident, Josiah Goodale, did not settle here until 100 years later. He is credited with clearing much of the land, and his descendants still live in the area. You probably know Flanders as the home of the Big Duck, where I work as a docent 3 days a week. The Big Duck was built in 1931 and is on the National and State Register of Historic Places. Despite the fact that it is owned by Suffolk County, many call it the Flanders Duck. It sits on Big Duck Ranch, which is a 37.5-acre passive recreation park owned by the town of Southampton. The Victorian barn on the property predates the duck and was just recently restored. Big Duck Ranch is just one example of hundreds of square miles of open space in Flanders. Nearly 85% of the land remains undeveloped. Sears Bellows, Hubbard Park, and Iron Point Parks are located here, as well as Smithers Preserve. As you travel through Flanders along Route 24, as many tourists do on their way to the Hamptons, you can still enjoy views of green pine forests and glimpses of calm blue waters. You will also pass more than 100 historic resources along this corridor. Just west of the Duck, on the other side of the road, is the Blue Barn, a town landmark. The oldest surviving house of James Benjamin at 1182 Flanders Road. It was built in 1782 and is listed on the National and State Register of Historic Places. In the summer of 2014, the town designated a significant portion of Flanders Road as a Hamlet Heritage Area. We're here in Flanders at the United Methodist Church, one of the oldest churches in Flanders, probably the oldest in Flanders. We're here to meet Dave Fox. He's going to tell us a little bit about the church and about Flanders, the town he grew up in.
My name is David Fox. I lived in Flanders all my life.
Did your family own a business on Flanders Road?
Yeah, Fox and Salvage Yard now at the end of Flanders, on the east end of Flanders.
Mm-hmm. And I understand that you also went to the one-room schoolhouse in Flanders?
Yes.
Aren't you in the fire department too?
Yes, I'm ex-chief of the fire department. I had 50 years next year in the fire department. When we was young, there was a lot of summer homes.
Right? Mm-hmm.
You know, and my baby blind most of summer. Oklahoma was still on Riverside Avenue, on that, Woodrow Trail, and even on this side, Maple and Flanders Boulevard, all those summer homes.
Here we are at the Flanders Men's Club, circa 1950. This structure is a long and wide one-story building with gable roof and side shed roof extension. Rather than to exude sophistication and elitism, it appears modest, quiet, and simply private instead. The property on which the facility exists was gifted to the club by Thomas I. Havens, Samuel Griffin's son-in-law of Methodist Point. The structure was originally a duckling house. Rails exist below the present concrete slab that carried a feed car through the building. The roof was heightened after the Flanders Men's Club took possession of the building. Hi, I'm Janice J. Young. I'm with the Southampton Landmarks Board, and we are here in the town of Riverside. This is right off the traffic circle, and although it is the zip code 11901, it is not Riverhead, it is Riverside. It's the westernmost hamlet of Southampton. And we're here to meet Ann Kirk,
yes,
right?
Kurt, yes.
Kurt, yes. And your business is affordable?
New and used furniture.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
We have collectibles, some antiques.
Right.
A little bit of everything.
Okay, yeah. Wonderful, that's great. Yeah. And I understand this is a very historic building. Steve, your landlord, has told me that it's possibly 150 years old.
I would say.
Mm-hmm.
I would say. Yeah. I'm told that it's been moved several times.
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
And ended up here, right on the traffic circle.
Well, we're glad to have you in Riverside.
Thank you.
So you must like doing business in Riverside.
I do.
Mm-hmm.
People are friendly. They're, very warm, very congenial. They like to come in and browse.
Mm-hmm.
Made a lot of good friends here.
Right. We're here in Riverside with Mr. Robert Fletcher. He's the owner of Fletcher's Barbershop. And he's been a barber here for about 20 years, but he's been in Riverside a lot longer than that. So Mr. Fletcher, how long have you been a barber?
About, I guess about 56 years.
Really?
Yeah, I was cutting hair before I came out here, actually, in New York City.
And when did you move to Riverside?
In 1961.
And you've been in this spot for?
21 years.
21 years. Mm-hmm. What changes have you seen in Riverside in the last 54 years?
Well, a whole lot of them, all of them to the good. Can't say nothing bad about it. In fact, I can't say nothing bad about Riverside because I enjoyed it all the years I've been here. Well, 50 years tells that.
Ryan, okay, you come to your office?
Yes, I do.
You do? Okay. And how long have you come here?
Been coming here for a while.
Okay. You pretty good barber?
Yes, he is. Good barber, great barber.
Okay.
Okay, polish it up, man. If you'd asked them after the haircut, it might have been different. Yeah.
I understand he's a good musician, too.
Yes, he is.
What I've heard. What do you play, Mr. Fletcher?
Saxophone and keyboard.
Right, yeah. We're glad to have you here in Riverside.
Oh, thank you, and I love being here.
We're here at McDonley Motors. This building dates back to 1895. And apparently the first Southampton police car was purchased here. And that was about 1925, Mr. McDonley tells me, the owner. We're here at the Goodwill AME Zion Church in Riverside. And this is Reverend Fields and his wife, Jessie Fields. And we call you Mother Fields, is that right? No?
Here they call me Reverend Jessie.
Reverend Jessie,
Yeah.
because you're both reverends.
passed.
Okay.
Yes.
And this was a very important church to the African American community in Riverside, here we understand.
Yes.
And still is.
Still
of
is.
course. Yes. And how long have you been pastor?
This is my 11th year.
11th year.
I think I'm the longest pastor so far.
Aha, congratulations.
Continue. Thank you.
We're happy to have you here.
Thank you.
And the church goes back to before the 1900s, I understand?
We can say 1872. That's what I was reading the history, that the church, it wasn't at this site, but it floated on this river and landed here. It was a barn.
Really?
And then the people that donated the land, that's how it got started.
Mm-hmm.
And different pastors kept adding till we have where we're at now.
I know Mrs. Manley's mother was the one who started this church in her home.
Mm-hmm.
And she used to live across the street, I think, Mrs. Helm. That's
the fellowship hall.
That's property that belonged to the Helms also that was donated to Goodwill. But you know, that's basically what they say, what they talk about with the history, the families over the years, that that's how it got started. It started in her home, and it was just regularly meeting, having prayer meeting, and discussing things. And you know, as their prayer meeting membership grew, they realized they needed a larger place. And so now we stand in what started from just a small group of people.
Right. We're here on Old Quag Road with Ray Nelson. And Ray Nelson has deep roots here. He's going to tell us all about it. You were born in this house, you said? Over there?
Yes, I was born over there.
Uh-huh.
And that was in 1939. House was about 3 months old at the time I was born. And that's where I grew up until I got married.
So you grew up right here on Old Quag Road?
On Old Quag Road. This is home, yes.
Right, okay. And your aunt lives here, I understand?
Yes.
And that's Aunt Alma?
No,
Mary.
Mary, right. Mary's been here since she was born. She was born in this house.
Mary Darden, right?
Mary Darden
yes.
now,
And
yes.
I know, and she's a member also, I believe, of the AME Zion Church?
Goodwill AME Zion.
Goodwill,
right.
yes. Right, yeah. And how old do you think this house is?
Wow, it goes back, let's see. My dad was born in 1915, so it has to be about maybe 1900, somewhere around there.
1900?
Yeah, it has to be.
Okay. And how old is your Aunt Mary?
Aunt Mary is about 81, I would say. I shouldn't say that so loud, should I?
And I understand you have another connection here. Your father had this business.
Right, this Nelbro Trucking was established around 1937, I think it was. Somewhere around there. And they went until around 1970, I think.
And he was one of 3 brothers, right?
Yeah. Well, the family was, there were 15 kids in the family.
Really?
Yeah. And of the brothers, yes, it was Myron, Harry, Frank, who's my father, and Norman, and Raymond that started the business, and Myron, and Jerry. Can't forget Uncle Jerry. And so they ran the business for a good number of years. And it wound up with the three of them when the business closed down. Yeah.
And you worked here too when you were a young man?
Yeah, well, it was mandatory.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, in the summertime when I wasn't in school, I was out in the freight yards hauling lumber, feed, different things. House moving, they did everything. Local and distance hauling. Yeah. They'd take produce from the farms to the south and then bring back oranges and grapefruit from the south. So made both trips worthwhile.
Yeah. And do you know anything about the migrant worker camp that was down on Old Quag Road?
Okay, yes. A few years back in the 70s, 69, 70, I used to work in a program called Seasonal Employees in Agriculture, and what we did was found work for farm workers. So because they're seasonal workers, try to get them something year-round. And there was a labor camp down there owned by Babinski. It was called Babinski Labor Camp, run by a fellow named James Brown. And so yeah, they used to house quite a few people down there. We used to go down there quite a bit to help them out. Well, one of the things about the labor camps was we tried to improve the treatment. In fact, we developed a program called Migrant Health, which was run by Suffolk County, and that ran for quite a few years to help migrants with their health problems.
Right.
And these were mostly people transported from the south up here. Now there's a lot of the workers are imported from out of the country, so it's a changeover.
Yes.
Our story begins well before there was a Long Island, when there were slow-moving glaciers made up of ice and rocks, rich soil and poor soil. One glacier formed the central spine of the island, along with the south fork of the east end. Another glacier followed and carved the steep north shore along with the north fork. What was left behind now shapes our story. By the time the first English settlers arrived in 1640, Long Island was already home to 13 Native American tribes. On the South Fork, the township of Southampton would eventually stretch 30 miles, 1/4 the full length of Long Island. During the township's first century, all the hamlets were established, except one. Our story is about that exception, the most recent hamlet founded in the early 1950s, a place hidden by the work of a glacier and by the present-day road network around it. A place few have heard of and few can find on a map. And yet, everyone who resides in, works in, or visits the Hamptons have traveled through it. 570 people live among the isolated 7,500 acres. Less than 5% of this vast territory is occupied. The remaining landscape is under federal, state, county, and town protection. More than 95% is preserved in its natural state. The glacial moraine here is home to the highest elevation on the east end, 302 feet above sea level. The lowest depth here is at lake bottom, 50 feet below the surface. Our hidden 70-acre lake is the largest inland freshwater lake east of Lake Ronkonkoma. The body of water is spring-fed, with its own 2-mile river system, and with its own waterfall. The town trustees report it is the cleanest lake in New York State. The mighty oak forest was lost to woodcutting, to keep families warm on the South Shore. What remains now is a vast pine land, known as the Long Island Pine Barrens. Sandy dirt roads, miles long, centuries old, remain to this day. Evidence of European inhabitants can be traced to the early 20th century, when legend has it that during the Prohibition era, a speakeasy thrived on the isolated lakefront. Years later, a daring young aviator from Massachusetts set up his family summer retreat and bulldozed his own dirt airstrip on the flat plain beyond the hills, 1.5 miles south of his lake house. In 1951, another young man, an architect from Manhattan, arrived on the scene. With wife and kids, he set out to shape a community from scratch that would be affordable and feature family recreation design into the landscape as a celebration of country living. The 27-year-old family man fell in love with the hidden lake setting. 70 acres with 70-foot cliffs diving into 50-foot deep waters. along with a 200-acre farm nearby. The young architect went on to find a developer from his hometown of Hollis, Queens, and together they teamed up. Land was acquired, 112 houses were designed and built, lagoons were dug, and a bathing beach created. The houses were set back, away from the lakefront, to keep the lake experience intact. The nearby Air Force Base needed housing for young families. Here was a setting to raise baby boomers. By 1957, America was fascinated with the latest craze, forming bowling leagues. The architect design was now the only bowling alley left standing on the South Fork. Several years later, television was bringing golf into everyone's living room. Suddenly, this elite sport became enticing and popular to the masses. But golf courses on the East End were not open to all. Restrictions by race and religion were the norm. By 1964, a team of local residents created and opened an 18-hole championship golf course that had no restrictions and was affordable. On opening day, the locals got golf great Sam Snead to be honorary pro. To this day, Snead still holds the record for most tournament wins in professional golf. The hamlet was also home to the RCA receiving field, a 2,000-acre site with soaring towers 300 feet high. In October of 1957, the field picked up the signal of a Soviet satellite named Sputnik. RCA immediately alerted Washington and the New York media. The headlines the next day: "The space race has begun." Decommissioned in the 1970s, this historic field was given to the state of New York as parkland. In the years that followed, on the other end of the hamlet, the eastern campus of Suffolk County Community College found its home here, along with a branch of Long Island University. The federal government is also here, with the hilltop FAA tower that helps guide aircraft to and from Europe. Prior to this, the site was an observation station run by the Beaumark Missile Plant to view unarmed missile launchings from underground silos to help protect the eastern seaboard from Cold War attack. The unlaunched missiles in the silos were nuclear armed. And so, for a hamlet unfamiliar to most, set in a forever forest with the freshest fresh water, we welcome the curious and adventurous to our corner of the world. Here stands the gateway to both the North Fork and the South Fork. Oh, by the way, the glorious lake, once known as Great Pond for the past century, is now known as Wildwood Lake. The pioneering and daring aviator with his own airstrip was Boston businessman Herb Springer. The developer of the 112-house neighborhood overlooking Wildwood Lake was Ed Drosch. The mid-century designed bowling alley that shares our nearby lake's namesake is Wildwood Lanes. The golf course, originally named Northampton Golf Club, is now Hampton Hills Golf and Country Club. The landscape architect who designed the challenging glacial setting golf course was Frank Duane. And the young architect who envisioned country living with swimming, bowling, and golf, his name was Leonard Sheldon. When he first got here, he studied maps of eastern Long Island, only to discover that a name was missing in the fabled Hamptons. With pen in hand, he christened this new adventure and new hamlet Northampton.
So I'm standing next to the 1735, more or less, Foster Meeker homestead. This is the oldest remaining dwelling in the village of Westhampton Beach, at least we understand it to be so. It's presently owned by the Westhampton Beach Historical Society and is being reconstructed in a manner that we believe to be reasonably consistent with its original construction. This is a milk house. It was moved here in about 2005 by the Historical Society. It was donated by folks who were selling the Thurston Rayner farm. The farm itself is now gone, but we were able to save the milk house. Thurston Rayner settled in about 1775 in the western portion of Westhampton in the area south of Union Place, and he established a dairy farm there. This dairy farm extended down much of Apawkuck Neck, which is where Apawkuck Point Road now exists, and he had a number of outbuildings associated with the farm, and this is one of them. In the milk house, every day after the cows were milked, the milk was brought in here and set in pans on the shelves inside. There was ice placed every winter in the bottom of the milk house. If you open this up, you would see that there is a cellar below the floor. And the ice kept the milk house at a very cool temperature year-round. So you could put the milk in here, you could make cheese in here, you could make butter in here, and this is where all the activity associated with processing and storing the milk occurred. The next structure next door is a carriage house and a two-hole privy that came from the Foster Meeker homestead, the same place that the yellow house came from that we just looked at. This structure is believed to date to about 1850. It was also donated to the Historical Society. We moved it here and placed it on its foundation, which you can see is locust posts, which would have been the same kind of foundation that it would have had originally. And this structure was used to store a carriage. We have a carriage in here now. We also have a tool collection in here, and the two-hole privy remains intact, and we take school children through it and demonstrate how a privy was used in the day before we had indoor plumbing. So in 1928 the village incorporated, but prior to that time there was definitely a strong business community down here, and the buildings were all made of wood. And that presented, of course, problems for fire because most people heated with wood as well. And so there were fireplaces and there were frequent fires. So one of the first things that the community, of course, did when the settlement got dense enough is they established fire companies. These were volunteer fire companies. And the main fire company they originally established, as I understand, was over on Quiog, which was at a distance from this area, which was quickly becoming the downtown area. So in 1903, they decided, the people who lived here decided it was time to have their own firehouse. This building was moved to this location in 1917, and it continued in use as a firehouse until at least 1953, when the not now the new firehouse, the firehouse that was just torn down was constructed. And of course now the firehouse that was constructed in 1953 has been torn down and a new firehouse is under construction. 103 Main Street, directly across the street, is known as the Weichselbaum Building. It was constructed in about 1895 and was purchased in 1902 by Moses Weichselbaum after he emigrated from Germany. And this building has continuously housed several grocery stores, including Weichselbaum's for many years, the Royal Scarlet Market, the W. Hines Meat Market, and the Westhampton Quag Market. This building was renovated not that long ago, but the owner kept the interesting architectural front here with the recessed doorways, and also restored the decorative materials at the top of the building in the front. This building is known as the Platt Building. This is one of the oldest commercial buildings in the village. We believe it was constructed by Hugo Schramm in the mid-1890s, and then it was sold to Henry Platt. This building has been home to a number of clothing stores, a Western Union telegram store, Sweezy and Newins, and most recently a Magic's Pub and Shock. Most interestingly, in 1925, John King moved the printing presses and the linotypes for the Hampton Chronicle, which it was known at that time, into the east end of the building, where they remained in operation until 1957, producing the Chronicle and what is now known as the Southampton Press. By 1914, the community had grown sufficiently that they needed their own post office, and this building was constructed as a purpose-built post office by E.H. Bishop in 1914. The front of the building was rented to the U.S. Postal Service and operated as a post office until 1940, when the current post office building was opened in downtown Westhampton Beach. Thereafterwards, this building was operated as Straw's stationery store until the 1950s, then as Cobb's Luncheonette until the 1970s, and it continues today as the Post Stop Cafe. This building is the Seeley Building, This was purchased in 1904, so presumably constructed prior to that. Purchased by James and Angelina Seeley, who lived upstairs with their 6 children and operated a general store on the first floor. If you notice, the front of the building is elevated relative to the street level, and that's because Baard Creek, which basically runs more or less under our feet here, used to run right across Main Street. And the folks who constructed this building recognized that the creek frequently flooded, and so they built the first story well above street level to keep the business from flooding. And by the way, Baard Creek used to be known as Aunt Harriet's Creek. Gloria Seeley, the youngest child of the Seeleys, took over the family business in the 1930s and ran it until the 1980s, after which the building was sold and converted to the Beach Bakery, which it continues to exist today. The patio building was constructed in 1931. The building is large and fronts on both Main Street and on Sunset Avenue. It was originally owned by Jesse and Milton Weichselbaum and Herman Bishop being one of the Heelbarb Corporation founders. And it was operated for many years as the only restaurant in town. And a number of folks who still live here remember the days of the dances and the hanging out in the bar and the restaurant. It was a lovely place. There were large dining areas and a dance floor. In the mid-1970s, this building was turned into condominiums and now houses a number of businesses and apartments, although the patio restaurant still exists. The next building that the Heelbarb Corporation constructed was the Westhampton Theatre, now known as the Performing Arts Center. It was constructed by a partnership between the Heelbarb Corporation and the Prudential Company, and then it was operated by the Prudential Company as the Westhampton Theatre. It opened in June 1932 with then New York State Governor Alfred E. Smith attending, and it was operated as a movie theater until 1996. The facade of this building features a number of Greek Revival elements that were maintained during the 1998 renovation into the PAC, and the interior was also reconstructed and now reflects the theater's historic past. This is the United Methodist Church. The central portion of this building dates to sometime in, I believe, the early 1700s. There is a parsonage located behind the church building and to the right. I think the parsonage is a newer structure. I would expect a late 1800s to early 1900s age for this structure. So your name is?
Lois Davis.
Lois Rayner Davis.
Oh, yes.
Originally Rayner?
Oh, yes, there are lots of us.
Yes, exactly. And when were you born?
1922.
Yes.
Across the street.
In the house?
In the house, it's still there.
Yes, exactly. So you've been here all your life?
Yes, except for going away to school and such as that, but I've lived here all my life, yes.
Yes. So when you were growing up here in, I guess it would be the 30s, what was life like? What was school like?
Oh, school was great. There was a 3-room school right across the street from us on the corner of South Phillips Avenue and what I call Main Street, South Country Road. There was a 3-room school. It was 3 rooms, and we had from kindergarten right through to the 8th grade.
What do you remember about the 1938 hurricane?
Oh, well, first of all, I remember hearing the storm, and it sounded, like a storm. The thing that impressed me most was the fact that stones were blowing up from the ground and hitting the window and cracking the windows. And at this point, somebody came to the door of the classroom and said, everybody is to go down to the gym. But I remember after the hurricane, the week after, we had guards stationed at various corners to keep people from looting. And there was a guard on the corner of South Country Road and Phillips Avenue, right where we lived. And he stopped cars, and they had to have a written permit to go to the village. We did go to the beach, and we would go over a row across. You couldn't get no bridges to go. And we would walk through those houses. It were all tilted, the floors this way and that way. It was an adventure to us, because I don't think we realized the horror of the whole thing at that point, but it was something I will never forget, a lot of it. Actually, I can remember this particular spot in Remsenburg was a center of town because we had the school and we were across from the school. But we were also very near our church. And I can remember we had bells in our church that would ring on Sunday morning. They would ring half an hour before church so that people could get there and wouldn't be late. Then at the time church started, they would ring another bell. Most people walked to church in those days.
And we're sitting right now in what was the original church building, the chapel, built in 1853, as I recall, on land donated by Elijah Phillips, who also donated land for the cemetery. And it was used as a sanctuary until, I believe, 1895 or 96, when the red brick church was dedicated. And that's all bound up in the story of how Spionk, which was eventually, originally what all of this area was known as, became Spionk, and part of it became Remsenburg. And that was in the late 1800s. The oldest houses in this community are the one that the Robinsons used to live in down the street.
Oh yes, the Ira Tuttle house.
The Ira Tuttle house. And this is where Ira Tuttle, who opened this little hardware store.
Yes, in his yard.
Yep. And then there's one house west of that that's also an old house, although I understand that house may have been moved to that location from where it was originally built.
That was Ira's brother.
Which Tuttle was that? Was that Perry?
That was Perry.
That was Perry Tuttle.
And I remember Perry. Now, I don't remember what he looked like, but Perry also owned the sand pit across the street.
Yes.
And we liked to play in the sand pit. You'd go down, run down the sand pit, and it was great fun.
And then down the street further, just a little bit east of here, is what had originally been a Phillips house. It's now Ann Hirsch's house, almost directly across the street from the red brick church.
Yes.
Other old houses in the community are, I believe, the Halstead house. And then there's also a house across from the end of Halsey Lane. And that's another of the oldest, one of the very oldest houses in the community. What do you remember of the yacht club in its early days?
The club was a small club, and
is it in the little white building that's still there now?
Yes.
That's the original clubhouse building.
I think so, yeah.
I remember when you got your Master Gardener's certification, and then you became one of the gardeners down at Judge Medina's estate, down at the end of Walker Point Road.
Oh. Well, I was not one of the gardeners, I was the only gardener. Mrs. Medina had passed away and had had a beautiful garden, but nobody had touched it for years. I enjoyed it very much. I had a very good time, and we did get some of the garden beds back to where they used to be.
So you mentioned that you were your father was a conductor on the Long Island Railroad. We're sitting here in the Spionk train station where he used to work out of.
Yeah.
And you said he started work for the railroad in 1902.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. For a while when he lived in Spionk, he was running a train out of Camp Upton.
Okay.
He used to run a train load of soldiers into New York.
Okay.
I guess when they had liberty.
So after the war, what did you do here? You had a garage, right?
When I first got out of the service, I thought I wanted to be in the garage business.
Okay.
So I went down to NB Rogers and bought some lumber and whatnot, and that the house where I was born was here. The next one west was where my grandmother lived.
And this is right out here on Montauk Highway, right?
Yeah, down east a little ways from here.
Right.
But anyway, where I was born was right next to Louis Douglas's garage.
Okay.
It was a fairly big house for that. And then my grandmother's house.
Okay.
Then there was a vacant lot.
Right.
So when I was in the service, I was able to save a little money because I didn't spend it going out drinking and things like that.
Yeah.
And I bought that house and lot from my mother.
Okay. Yep.
And built that garage.
Yep.
Well, I was in the garage business for about 5 years. And that was enough.
Yep.
Finally quit and went to work at the air base.
Okay. And what did you do at the air base?
Auto mechanic.
So what did you do after that?
I went to work for Phillips General Supply in Hampton Bays.
Okay.
I worked there for 10 years.
Now Phillips General Supply was
Auto parts.
auto parts. Okay.
Paints and
Where were they located? In Hampton Bays.
right on Main Street in Hampton Bays, next to the firehouse.
Okay. Is the building still there?
Still there.
Still there.
It's an auto parts place, but
Okay.
it's somebody else. Murray Phillips passed away.
Okay.
Murray Phillips run it when I worked there.
And how long did you work there?
10 years.
Okay. So that would have been 60s, maybe into the early 70s?
Yeah.
And when did you retire?
81.
81. Okay.
My last job was with Adelworth Bus.
Ah, yes.
I used to rebuild the bus engines, and I used
Okay.
to paint them. And
Yep. So I understand you're the oldest living resident in Spion.
born in Sphere.
More than Spion.
I think so. Vera Zaykowski had me beat, but she passed away.
Ah. That was one of the amazing things about the war. There were so many people that moved during the war, either because they were in the service or they were following service people. And we just saw a tremendous influx of people from the other parts of the United States move in during the war.
Well, my wife come up here in 1929
Okay.
during the Depression. Her father, I don't know, but I think he was a sharecropper.
Okay.
Her father and her two older brothers and her, and there might have been a couple of older sisters. I don't know how many of them came up, but she came up then, and they landed in Eastport.
So they were looking for work then.
That's right. They were, and they did. They found work on a duck farm.
Okay.
They worked for Warner's duck farm.
That was the era of lots and lots and lots of duck farms.
Yes, that's right.
Even small ones.
Oh, yes.
Just regular farms that they added ducks in a big way, and
Yeah.
as opposed to the
So
ones like
anyway,
Wilcox's that were all ducks.
she come up here, and then she at the Eastport Church. I was the secretary in the big Sunday school, and she was the secretary in the intermediate Sunday school, and she had to bring reports into me, and then I got to know her. So before I went overseas, we were engaged. And the ship came back to Norfolk for some repair work, had to go into dry dock. And I had a 10-day leave. And like I say, I was engaged before I went over. But then when I come back, we got married.
Yep. In the Eastport Bible Church?
No, at the parsonage.
Oh, at the parsonage. Okay.
Just the preacher and Janice Wilcox and Lois's brother and us.
We hope you've enjoyed seeing what makes Southampton such a special place, learning about its history, its historic sites, and meeting some of its longtime residents. The Landmarks and Historic Districts Board wishes to thank all of those people that participated in and helped compile this documentary. We hope you might choose to share this video with your friends and family and other visitors to the area as we again celebrate the town's 375th anniversary.